Steve is in Islington. Steve, what would you like to say?
Wow, you've worn me out.
You've worn me out, mate. I've got to get through to 1 o'clock. You can have a lie down after this.
Oh, blimey. Right, I don't know where I've got to start, but I'll be perfectly honest with you, James. I am confused, totally and utterly confused. And the reason I'll tell you this is I'm not an educated man.
Oh.
Far from it.
Yeah.
But when people come on the phone to you and speak to you every day about leaving Europe and leaving the European Union, everybody else, including people like me, seems like a complete and utter idiot. They talk to you, and you're an educated man. They talk to you as if everybody that's voted no and voted leave don't know what they're on about. But the point I'm trying to make, James, is why were we ever given the vote?
Yeah.
The fact that we was given a vote, right, and most people that voted to leave Europe voted for probably, and this is my own opinion, on maybe 2 or 3 things. One was immigration, right, which is, you might not think it, James, but a lot of people do. Obviously, most of the 52% of people that voted probably thought like me that we are flooded with migrants, flooded to almost the point that the country can't take any more. We're also worried about our schooling. We're also worried about our housing. We're also worried about the National Health Service. But we're all deemed as being complete and utter idiots. The fact that we were given this vote was so wrong for all the reasons that you have been speaking about in the last year. You know, you look at the customs union, the soft and hard.
I think the biggest thing for me when I try
know anything about it.
No, when I try and reach out to people like you, the biggest thing is that we had the rights and we had the rules in place to have much more stringent immigration regulations than the ones that we have, and subsequent governments elected not to impose them for 2 reasons, they would argue, I imagine. Number one, it wouldn't be cost effective. It would cost so much to do and it wouldn't save anything. And number 2, because having immigration as this constant Banquo's ghost at the feast, that they could constantly say all the things you've just listed, you're blaming on immigration. I blame them on bad government. But if I was running a bad government, I'd love the idea that people like you were blaming it all on immigration.
It is a bad government, but James, the point I'm trying to make is all the other issues, the parts that you're talking about, of the effect that it's going to have on this country financially.
Yep.
95% of the 52% probably didn't know anything about this. You know, when I listen to you every day and I try to absorb what you're saying about, hard and soft Brexit,
Thank you.
hard and soft borders,
Yes,
and customs unions and everything else that goes with it, it's way above our head, James.
it's not, mate.
It is, James.
It's not. Why are you listening every day then, unless you understand what I'm saying?
No, because James, I'm 56 years of age, but I'm still trying to learn. That is what I'm trying to
You have
learn.
learned. The thing you can't compute.
I'm learning from you. But
Yes. Thank you, mate.
Say, James, is
Go on.
When I go, look, I live in Harrow.
Yeah.
When I go down to Harrow, and this is not being racist, James, because that term is so easily used and very loosely used. When I go down to Harrow, and I've lived here for 30 years, I walk into Harrow Shopping Centre, and I swear to God, I don't know where I am. I've got Polish, Romanians, Bulgarians sitting outside coffee houses doing sod all day. I've got every nationality under the sun, and it's lost its identity. When I go into Norfolk Park Hospital, and I went in there 3 Sundays ago because I had to go in an emergency, I walked into the accident and emergency, as I said to your researcher, 120 people in there. I was lucky if I saw 3 or 4 white faces. It's okay if you live
Now
there.
that is racist.
No,
that last bit is.
It's realistic.
No, it isn't, because you're forming an opinion of people or their value based on their colour. There are people who don't have white faces who are just as British as you and me, Steve.
Perhaps there are, James, but if...
Well, no, they all are.
You go down
and that's... name me the European Union... Steve, mate, let's not do this. Let's do it nicely. Just tell me the European Union country that is populated by non-white people.
Couldn't tell you.
Well, have a go. Have a little think.
Say the question again?
The European Union countries, because we're talking about your reasons for leaving the European Union, and then you mentioned the fact that there weren't any white people in Northwick Park Hospital. So which European Union countries are essentially non-white?
Probably none.
So why are you talking about those people then?
All right. Let's backtrack.
Yeah, let's, mate. I'm happy to let you do that.
No, let's backtrack. But it is still a valid point, James.
Not in the context of a conversation about the European Union, Steve.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that if you are judging people according to their skin colour, then you are, and I say this with love and reluctance, then you are indulging in racial prejudice.
But James is.
So I don't care what colour you are. I don't say. I'm never going to say to Beth at the end of the programme, we had too many black people on today, or we had too many white people on today.
But it's not all about. It's not all about white people, white English people. We're going off tangent.
Well, no, you did, mate. I'm just reining you back in again. So crack on.
It's not all about the racist issue. It's just about the fact that the country has lost its identity.
What does that mean?
And that. Well, what does it mean? It means that what I've just said, that...
You've just said that you don't like seeing brown faces at the hospital.
Okay, no. Is it right then, James? Let's give another example. Right? I might be digging myself a big hole, but...
I'll pull you out, mate, I promise.
Right, but the point I'm trying to make, if you went down to my local, and I'll give you an absolute point here, if you went down to my local supermarket, I won't name which one it is, okay?
Yeah.
And one of my sons tried to get a job down, or two of my sons tried to get a job down there in a few years when they were in between university and going from college to university. At one point, James, there was 23 tills open, and 22 of them, okay,
yes, mate,
had Indians or Pakistani people.
But we're talking about the European Union, Steve.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say, James, is this is where it's all coming from. And when I mentioned this to the manager, okay, the manager said to me, we have to reflect the local community. And the point I'm trying to make, James, and you're trying to, to a degree, defend me, but to attack me, is that right, James?
Mate,
that is why people have voted out of Europe.
Because we've got too many brown people on the tills in Harrow.
It's not about having too many, but when I was...
What is it then, Steve? Just mate, slow down a little bit. Because if you're not complaining about there being too many brown people, why do you keep talking about the number of brown people in the hospital and the number of brown people in the supermarket?
The reason I'm saying that is, James, is because that is why people voted to leave Europe, because of Great Britain.
I don't disagree with you. No, it's not because of Great Britain losing its identity. It's because people are frightened of brown people.
No, it's not about it. No, James.
What difference does it make to me? Just help me out here, because I can kind of get my... Just because I work on the phones every day, so I have no idea what colour anybody is. Steve, stop talking. Stop talking, just for a moment, my friend, all right? Why does it matter to you what colour the person that you buy your milk off is?
Well, it doesn't matter the colour that the person I buy my milk off, James. But the point I'm trying to make is why people voted out of Europe.
I'm not arguing with you. They voted out of Europe because they think there's too many brown people in their hometowns.
Is it unfair then, James, to say that when I mentioned what I said about the local supermarket, that
and the hospital,
when I'm told, and the hospital, but let's go to the supermarket. When I'm told that we have to reflect the local community, is that not racist, James?
No, Steve.
Well, explain to me why it's not racist.
What, reflecting the local community?
Yeah, because it's basically saying, well, because there's predominantly more Asian, and because this is what the manager's told me, Steve.
James, you're Steve.
Because there's more Indian or ethnic minorities in Harrow, we have to reflect the local community.
Right, well, possibly you misunderstood him, but if anybody in that supermarket was given a job based upon their skin colour, then the employer would be breaking the law.
Well, they did. Because
well, then you should report it to the relevant authorities. But did you? Crikey. Well, then let's return to my question, okay?
My son got a job.
I want you to talk to me about this. When I drop my little girls off at school, and in their primary school, there are Polish children and Romanian children, Albanian children, brown children, black children, children of Asian origin, children of Eastern European origin. When I explain, I don't need to, thankfully, but when you're talking to your children when they were younger, how did you explain to them that they should judge their friendship group according to those origins, and they should judge those people in their class differently according to what colour they were or where they came from?
I never ever said to my children when they were kids how they should judge people.
So why do you want to do it with checkout assistants and patients at the hospital?
Because as far as I'm concerned, James, we have to a degree, fight back.
Against what, Steve? Fight against what, Steve? People? Checkout assistants and poorly people?
No, you're twisting your words there, James.
No, I'm not. I'm twisting your words.
No, it's not about that, James.
Go on then. So what are we fighting back against?
Well, what I just said to you earlier.
What? Brown people?
No, it's not about.
What is it then, Steve?
But James, is it fair? Is it fair that if you go into a local supermarket, as an example,
Steve,
and there's 23 tills open and 22, I'll pose one question before I go then, James. I will assure you of one thing.
Go on, mate.
If I went to my local supermarket and there was 22 white English, white Irish, white Scot behind them tills, I can assure you that the other nationalities would have something to say about it.
I can assure you they wouldn't, Steve. I'll leave you with one thought. Let's look at both of your supermarkets, the fictional one and the actual one. The one with 22 brown people on the checkouts and one white person, and then the one with 22 white people and one brown person. Do you know what I see in those supermarkets?
Yeah.
23 people.
But you might, James, but that's unfortunately getting back to the first point of this discussion.
Which was don't call me racist.
No, it's why people voted.
I'm not arguing with you. I think you're absolutely right. People voted to leave the European Union because there's too many brown people in their A&E. And I can't help you, Steve. I really can't. Do you think it's going to be better now? Do you think there's going to be fewer Pakistanis in Harrow Sainsbury's as a result of us pulling out of the European Union?
No, I don't.
Oh, well done then. That was great. 12-19.
It's useful to be deeply challenged. It's good to have an enemy because the enemy makes you think. The enemy tells you things that no one else will tell you. It's the adversary that stops you from being merely inert. And so postmodernism plays that role. It's extraordinarily critical. But things can go too far. When they go too far, they reverse. That's what happens. And hopefully they're reversing now. Hopefully. Limits on immigration are also reasonable. Well, we need to figure out what those limits are, and that's what the bloody political dialogue is for. But the fact that it should be limited to some degree is also reasonable. Otherwise, why not just open the borders and let everybody come in? Well, the reason you don't do that is because a complex system cannot tolerate extensive transformation over too short a period of time. Now, you want immigrants to come in, especially if they're the sorts of immigrants who are likely to contribute properly to the success of your polity, and lots of immigrants do that. I mean, I think the vast majority, for example, of entrepreneurs in the United States come from the Indian subcontinent. So great, bring them over. They're highly educated, they're extraordinarily productive, they make lots of new businesses, and then they pump money like mad back into India. Good deal. But that doesn't mean that we have our arms are open to everyone immigration policy, because it's complete rubbish. All that means is you're not thinking about it. So, and here's a coda to that for conservatives. Here's something. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It should not be assumed that citizens of societies that have not evolved functional individual rights predicated polities will hold values in keeping with such polities. So we could say, look, there are a lot of countries in the world that are not governed well. The vast majority of them, right? And they've been not governed well forever. And to me, that means that there's something wrong with the values that are held collectively by the people who've established those polities. Well, you shouldn't be naive and assume that merely because you move them to a new country, they're going to let their innate democratic longings flourish. It doesn't work that way. So if you stand up and say, look, let's be a little cautious. Let's make sure that we don't transform our society so rapidly that we lose what we have. Let's be careful about that. That doesn't mean that you're a morally reprehensible demon. It just means that you're conservative, and it's a reasonable position to hold. So there's no sense in apologizing for it. Now that doesn't mean you get to hide your bigotry under a mask of moral virtue, you know. The discrimination issue is quite clear as far as I'm concerned, so that's associated with bigotry. If you have two people who are applying for a job, you should pick the one that's most qualified and not pay any attention to any of the other attributes of the person that have nothing to do with the job. Okay. Right. I think we figured that out in about 1965. Now, we're not doing it perfectly, you know, but it's not that much later than 1965, and our society, particularly in Canada, is pretty damn open. You can come in here, and if you work hard, and if you're fortunate, you don't get sick, and God smiles on you, so to speak, you can be successful. There's still prejudice, unreasonable prejudice and discrimination, but our society is not, as the radical egalitarian equity promoters have it, structurally racist, bigoted, and misogynistic. No. Not only that, just so you know, there was a recent review published, and I mean recent, 2017, looking at that damn literature on unconscious bias. And I knew the literature to begin with. There is no evidence that unconscious bias can be measured properly, not reliably. There's also no evidence whatsoever that if you do measure it, and you can't very well, that it does any better job of predicting actual, say, bias and prejudice than just tests of attitude. So the notion that our culture is somehow structurally misogynistic and racist, and the reason for that is because of the unconscious bias of the monsters who are running it is well, maybe it's not wrong, but I can tell you one thing about it. It is not a scientifically justifiable proposition, and that's what it's being passed off as. And I place that firmly at the feet of the social psychologists, which social psychology happens to be a fairly corrupt discipline, by the way, and the people who invented the implicit association test, which measures unconscious bias, because they have not come out publicly to the degree that they should have and said, our test, which was for experimental purposes, is being misused politically. You know, your damn judges now, because of federal fiat, have to undergo mandatory unconscious bias retraining before they can sit on the bench. And so you don't think that's political re-education, it's because you're not paying attention. And there's zero evidence that it does what it's supposed to. And I would also recommend to all of you, if you happen to be in a workplace that introduces diversity training or unconscious bias training as a mandatory requirement, you tell them in no uncertain terms that you are not participating in a process that deems you bigoted and misogynistic without evidence of that being the case. And if you trot off to the training, then you've just agreed that that's who you are. And believe me, once you've agreed to that, man, you'll be agreeing to a bunch of things you don't want to agree soon afterwards. So it's time just to put a stop to that. Enough of that. None of that unconscious bias retraining, especially not the mandatory type.